is Notsam Wrestling.
Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
So this is a gentleman that I didn't know would ever be on the podcast necessarily. I always knew it would be fun to talk to him on the podcast, but for most of the time that we've known each other, that wasn't exactly an option. He wasn't in the position where he would, quote unquote, put himself over. But he's finally gotten there. Gentleman is somebody who, it's really interesting too, because as smart as we all are as fans, right? As much as we all know everything that's going on behind the scenes, there are many names that we don't know that are extremely important, even in a day-to-day sense, not just in the office, in the show that you're watching every single week. There are a lot of names that don't get thrown around because, I don't know, for whatever reason, they don't get stooged off to dirt sheets. But this name is one of them. Michael Mansury is on the show with us. He's got a new podcast. He's actually taking the reins from Pat McAfee and myself. Wrestling with Sports Entertainment, the phenomenon that debuted in July 2019, is back, and it's back with a vengeance, hosted by legendary WCW commentator Mark Madden. And this man, Mike Mansury. What's going on, man?
Sam, thank you so much for that lovely, lovely introduction. How are you, brother?
I'm good. And I was thinking, first of all, one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on was to put my stamp on it. So I always talk about how when I talk to people who are quote unquote wrestling fans, whether they be like celebrities who are wrestling fans or even like people that interview wrestlers or people that are on YouTube or people that are kind of commentators on the business and that's what their claim to fame is, I always kind of test them out. Like I always know, and I'm sure you do the same thing as like a serious wrestling fan. Like you, within the first couple of minutes, like you kind of figure out the conversation and you know exactly the level of wrestling fan that they're on. But with you, I think it's a step further. I think there are a lot of people that have worked in WWE that go on to do a bunch of interviews about what things are like behind the scenes and do podcasts about wrestling and stuff like that. And it's like, you did work at WWE, but you still don't really know what you're talking about. You get that vibe. And I'm like, you're not like, you did work there, but I don't think, and the minute that I heard you were actually jumping into the wrestling podcast stratosphere, I was like, yes, this is exactly who should be adding expertise and a level of commentary to this stuff. Because, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, you've got the evidence. You're one of the people who I'm texting with basically every time wrestling's on TV. There's a text chain going back and forth between me and you.
Oh yeah, 100%. And we're going at it with a very critical eye, and sometimes with an enjoyed eye.
Uh-huh.
But I used to kind of have that same reaction, Sam. Right, like when I was within WWE. You'd see a writer or a production person or even somebody that may have been an extra at a WWE event break off on their own and go off and, run a podcast and give you what they claim is inside information, based on fact or opinion. More often than not, it was always opinion. And I used to make fun of it 100%. I used to sit there and say, this is dumb. This person had a cup of coffee at WWE, maybe not even enough to watch the grind so I can collect the bottom of the filter. But what do they know? What are they going to bring? What insight besides some, skewed perception of what's happening backstage? And I always dismissed it. And, when I had started with Pat McAfee, when I started working with Pat after I left WWE, we had initially talked about reviving Wrestling with Sports Entertainment pretty early on. This was July of last year that I started with Pat. And I said, I want to kind of give it some time. I don't want to kind of come fresh out the chute because unbeknownst to me, the wrestling world had kind of taken the story of my departure and ran with it for a little bit. But I think it was also at a sensitive time because like the WWE co-presidents, they were shown the door and, COVID was happening. So folks were digging for headlines. And I just didn't want it to be a situation where it's like, all right, well, this guy left. He's probably got a lot of dirt to spill. Put him on a podcast and let him just explode on the company. And that's nothing that ever really appealed to me. That's nothing that appeals to me now working on wrestling with sports entertainment. Like, I just want to offer, you know, praise and critique, but more so from my perspective as a producer, as somebody who lived inside and someone who's gotten a phenomenal education in wrestling. I live to educate. I don't want to criticize just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you're only one episode in, but I think like some of the most interesting insight is that stuff where it's like, well, here's why you think this might be bad, but here's what this actually is, or here's the intention of this, or here's where this is actually going, and it's not the sort of, yeah, you think they don't know what they're doing. Let me tell you how much they don't know what they're doing. It's no, this is the psychology behind a lot of decisions that get made. Because I mean, as somebody that has watched wrestling for 35 years. Like literally it's the thing that I love the most. My family obviously comes second. I I like just being backstage. You're like, "Oh, this is completely different." Sitting in a truck with you and listening to stage direction and listening to everything that goes into making the show, you're like, "Oh." And you never look at the show the same way again.
No, right? Like once you do get like below the surface and really see the inner workings and how the whole machine is wired, right? Like you kind of gain a better appreciation for it. And that appreciation grew for me from day one, right? Like, I started WWE in March of 2009. And just like you, I grew up a big fan. I kind of fell off a little bit as I got older. But once I, knew that that's where I was headed, kind of got myself back into the product. And, it's one thing, right? Because even as a kid, you're watching the show and you think something's great, you think something sucks, but you don't know what goes into it. The moment I saw what went into it, I fell in love with every aspect of it and almost reinvigorated my love for the business that much more. And not even from putting the matches together and watching the boys, kind of plan things out. It was, wow, this is what it takes just for Monday Night Raw to make air. This is unbelievable. It blew my mind. And it just, like I said, it just made me fall in love with the business that much more.
Yeah, just the idea of this is what goes in, but this is just regular. Like this isn't like, the chaos of Monday night is not like, oh, this was a chaotic Monday night. You're like, no, this is just Monday. We'll do it again later this week. We'll do it again next Monday. We got a pay-per-view on Sunday. It's just this is the day to day. I would imagine that any job, whether it's with Pat McAfee or whoever else in any form of media or any form of anything, when you come out of WWE, the pace on life just has to change dramatically for you.
Yeah, 100%. You go from 180 miles an hour, 52 weeks a year. And when you start downshifting gears, you don't know what to do with yourself. Like my first few months after I left WWE, I was, I started having like anxiety attacks because like I just felt like I was doing something incorrect or I was missing something. 11 plus years of lather, rinse, repeat, town, arena, airport, etc. It was gone. And you miss that frenetic pace, man, because like going back to what we were talking about before, when you're part of putting something together, it makes the feeling of completion of the product, in our case, a show, feel that much more gratifying. And you really forget how complex putting those shows together really can be when you're in the middle of it and you're in the middle of it for so long. We used to give tours to folks, like we'd have partners and, folks just come in just to kind of get a look of behind the scenes at what it takes to make Raw or SmackDown happen. And we would nonchalantly explain everything to them. And they'd, just walk around with just amazement and wonder in their faces, jaws slacked. And they're like, how can you guys just treat this so easily? Like how does this happen so easily? And you forget, like, you've just got a dedicated crew of people that really sacrifice everything to put that all together, from the men and women that get there at 6 a.m. for loading to put this set together, to the writers, to the production staff, to the talent, everyone else in between, to catering. Like everyone really gives their all to make sure that what you see on TV happens flawlessly.
Yeah. I mean, I remember my first WrestleMania that I was working there. It was like, and it was the simplest things. It was just a quick stand-up shot of me for a minute hyping people up. And I remember we pre-taped it, right? We pre-taped one, and the producers go back and listen to it, and they're like, no, the audio sucks. Like, there's no way. Let's go pre-tape it again. And we pre-tape it again, and they kind of change some things. They go, okay, I think the audio's better. and it's supposed to run within the first like 10 minutes of the kickoff show for WrestleMania. This is the WrestleMania, the second Orlando one where the Hardys came back. And the pre-show starts, and I'm sitting there on the sidelines. You always sit there just in case. Even if you're not on the panel, you sit there just in case, because stuff like this comes up where the producer, he gets something in his earphones and he looks at me and he goes, Sam, we're doing it live. We got to run to the floor, and we're running through it. We're literally running through a stadium trying to run down, and we get there. We clear out space on the floor. We were we were in a box. We go all the way down to the floor. We clear it out. We finally get a camera. He's like sitting there, and this is the beauty of it, that it's not like you could just jump in the crowd and stick a camera. It's like the producers are smart enough to be like, at this rushed pace, placing the audience around me in the right semicircle, so it all looks, make sure the short kids are up front, the tall kids are behind them, so it doesn't look like, stupid. Okay, guys, just cheer. We're on 5 seconds. Sam, you ready to go? 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, boom, and here we go. And it's WrestleMania time, and you're just like, yeah, this isn't like, oh, I'm gonna write a book about how chaotic today was. This is how we put on these shows. This is why they look like they do, because this is the pace that we work at.
Yeah, it's some folks base jump, right? For to get that like adrenaline rush, right? I'm terrified of heights, so my adrenaline rush and my junkie thrill was always producing live TV. And I'm sorry for making you take that sprint from the press box all the way down to the floor.
No, I loved it, but I think so. We met first, and this is to show how long you've been at WWE, because there was a period of time, I think a lot of people also kind of overplay their importance sometimes, after they leave WWE, or maybe overplay how much they were actually there. But like the year before COVID, I remember you were on a run where you were literally in the truck for Raw. Then you would go to LA for the Fox show backstage. Then you would go to Orlando for NXT. Then you would go to SmackDown. Then you go back to your apartment in New York on Saturday, and then on Sunday start the week again. Like, that wasn't a one-off week for you. There was a period of time where you were literally doing every show.
Yeah, I was spending a lot of money to have a closet in New York for a time there. Yeah, there was a stretch, like you said, right? It was either producing or working in some capacity on Raw, stay the night that town, Tuesday morning, whatever ungodly hour it had to be, fly to LA, do WWE backstage with Renee Young, red eye to Orlando, get a couple hours of sleep on the plane, and then go do NXT. Thursday, office hours in the city, Friday SmackDown, and the occasional Sunday pay-per-view. But it sounds crazy. You say that and it sounds so crazy.
Yeah.
And Kevin Dunn would pull me aside. Kevin Dunn was my boss at WWE, the executive producer. He would say, "You good? Like, do you need anything? Like, pretty fucking crazy." And I'd say, "No, man, I love it. Let's just keep going. What do you need? What's next? What's next?"
Yes. Yeah, and because and that's I think why you did so well there, because when you're doing it, not only do you get used to it, but you actually, at a point, it's like, yeah, I like working at this pace. Eventually, I'm going to get exhausted, but until I get there, this is fun. Like, this is the level that I want to be playing at. You're almost testing yourself, like the endurance that you have. You're like, you get this sense of accomplishment. I would have to imagine being like, yeah, I can perform at this level, at this rate for a long time.
100%. You almost feel like a sense of invincibility, right? Like, for a time there, I thought I was Superman, that I could do those marathon runs and feel fine. Eventually it catches up to you, and your body can humble you. But when you're in the thick of it, and like I said, it's just that sense of accomplishment and that sense of satisfaction that you feel when every project, show, whatever the case may be, is completed. It's hard to put that in the words. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a parent, but I would imagine it'd be like watching your kid do something pretty freaking cool. Like, to me, that's what like the end of a show would feel like. You feel just very, very proud. And after a point, like, when I started to produce those shows, I would feel proud, not for myself, you know what I mean, but more so for the team that was around me, because without a great team, nothing goes right. You know what I mean? A producer is only as good as the people that he has around him, supporting and working in every capacity possible.
Yeah. You're in a truck explaining what you want over a headset. So if you've got a group of people that can't deliver what you want, then who cares what you want? Like, it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and it's wild too, man, because like, I place a lot of pressure on myself in situations like that, right? Like, because I always want to perform at the top. And the best feeling is when you know that those around you are elevating themselves or just keeping themselves in that same pace because everyone's kind of going for the same goal. And it's just a really cool feeling.
So, I mean, I met you for the first time, I think, long before I was doing kickoff shows or anything through, mutual acquaintances. I believe there was a Josh Matthews connection
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
saw each other a little bit socially. But then I mean, I distinctly remember I went in for an audition, like just a traditional
Great story.
audition, which I mean, I didn't even get a no. Like the amount of no callback that I got, like it was like I'm leaving messages on the machine asking you to not you, but asking WWE to say no. And it was like, we're not even gonna, I mean, it's such a no that we're not gonna call you back. Like it is not a chance. And it's like,
No,
like
no.
we're not even having a conversation with you. And there were people at that audition that got the gig. So it's not the audition, it's you. it's like, okay, all right. But, you go in and I did like the trial of, commentating some matches on tape and everything. And then one of the things that they had me do at that time was to go like, they want to see how you would interview a superstar. So they're like, here's producer Mike Mansury. And I believe at that point you were Ryback. And I had to
Yep.
I had to interview you, and you were just trying to throw every conceivable monkey wrench in my direction as I interviewed you.
I think looking back on it now, right? I feel like I may have sabotaged your audition a little bit. Um, but hey, it all worked out for the better, right? Like you may not have gotten the gig then, but we brought you in a different capacity, and you've been killing it ever since, man. It's been for me, even watching you now take the reins on those NXT Takeover pre-shows when you were always kind of the analyst, right, or the color commentary on it. To see you take the lead now and run it with Stu Bennett, old Wade Barrett, and whoever else they throw at you.
Mhm.
It's been cool. It's been cool to see, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. But, I mean, you were the voice in my ear for, almost the vast majority of the kickoff shows and pre-shows that I've done. And I've said, I think I've told, I don't even know if I've told the story or not, but there were many instances where you would literally on the show, and you were very good. This is because you're a very good producer, because you would never give me specific verbiage. There was one time, we'll get into that, but you'd never give me specific verbiage. You would just kind of sort of guide me and let me know what the show looked like outside of myself with real simple instructions. And I remember, I think it was a SummerSlam or something like that, but on a show you were like, we need more Sam. You're being too much broadcaster. We need more Sam. And so I would turn up the Sam. And then you'd be like, okay, less Sam. You're burying people now. It's too much Sam.
Yeah, I mean, that's you kind of got to know the folks that you're working with, right? And I think one instance that I remember of the two of us doing a show together, there was a takeover. I want to say it was Chicago, and I think you were working with Mansour. We tried Mansour out on a panel, and I had asked, for some reason, the folks at WWE weren't into it. I had always wanted to feed the audio of the pre-show or kickoff show announcers to the audience. And I was always denied for some reason. And at the time, those reasons always made sense. But, I kind of made the push for it this time, and I got my way on it. And I love that interactivity between the panelists and the audience, because they're watching, there's nothing going on in the arena but you guys.
Mhm.
So the audience really has no context as to what's going on, and kind of like a dull experience. So we fed those mics out to the crowd, and you were leaning so hard into just being a pain in the ass and being Sam, and the audience was letting you have it. And I remember you started playing to the audience every time. And I remember I told you, don't lean into it. Don't play to them. If you actually don't play into what their reaction is going to be, it's going to make you that much more of a quote unquote heel or a bad guy in their eyes. Right. And that's exactly what happened. You followed just that. You changed course, and you couldn't get a word out. It was almost like, that Kevin Owens Elias promo in Seattle, just to kind of put you on that pedestal. Right. Like,
Yeah.
you got to feel things. And that's one thing that I learned at WWE that, I'm going to take with me forever. I think what always helped me in producing was that everything I did, I felt. I didn't, if it didn't feel right, then it probably wasn't right. And that was, that's kind of how I operated 99% of the time.
Yeah, because it's this, especially when you're a wrestling fan and you get that reaction for the first time and people are booing you. It's like, for me, it was intoxicating. So you're like, oh, I can play into this. And you're like, you were smart enough to be kind of outside of the moment that I was in and go, no, they're booing you not because you're playing into something, because you're not likable. So just continue to be not likable. And I was like, oh.
And
so
you actually, you by doing that actually got Mansory over that much more.
Oh, God. They
the
loved
crowd
him.
hated everything. Yeah, you could have uttered, just any syllable out of your mouth and the crowd hated you. So the moment that Mansory would just come out and say, he could have just said hello the entire night and the crowd would have just eaten him up because, that story was told. And we did a good job in telling that story.
Okay, so there was one time that you gave me verbiage. And it was not the first WrestleMania. It was the second WrestleMania. Vic Joseph has told me that it was his first time doing commentary at WrestleMania, and I ruined the feed into him, which he's not incorrect about that. But we talk about being out there on the fly, and I was in the crowd, and I was just kind of, and like I've said, like there was never verbiage for me, and I think that was always best for everybody, right? Like I can formulate my own sentences. That's kind of what I do.
Except for this one occasion.
Yeah, not this one. By the way, this is what happens. Whenever I get a script or actual verbiage, like, can you do this for me? I'm like, yeah. And I can never, like, if there's a sentence in my head that I actually have to say, it's
what you always forget.
It's the
always
worst.
Forget the point that you have to hammer home. 100%.
So I go out there and like, the radios, I guess, weren't working in the Superdome because like plans were changing as I was doing my talk, and the producer who was with me wasn't informed because his radio didn't work. So as I'm going, I'm kind of mid-sentence, and you're in my ear, and you go, okay, we're changing it. Just tell him action's on the way. And I go, and action's on the way. And you go, no, at the end of the thing, at the end. and this moment where I'm looking at the camera like trying to figure out how do I get back to saying and action's on the way is the beautiful Mike Mansury in my ear letting me know, like, no, not just mid-sentence, not just out of nowhere. Say it at the end of your thing.
So I'm gonna fill in the gaps because this really is such a beautiful story. And I loved your Cliff Notes version of it. So it's WrestleMania 34 in New Orleans at the lovely Superdome or Silverdome, depending on who you ask. And the creative was for you to try to get an interview with John Cena. John Cena's whole thing that night was he was going to sit in the crowd because if The Undertaker wasn't going to respond to his WrestleMania challenge, then he was going to go to WrestleMania as a fan. You were going to interview John, and John was so swarmed with people. And like you couldn't even get in to the point where I think, whoever that your stage manager was with you just said it to me. I said, all right, fine, that's fine. Let's just have Sam do a stand up. Everyone's radio start crapping out. Your IFB and your ear doesn't work. The stage manager on the floor, his headset goes out because you're in a stadium that's starting to fill up with, 70 some odd thousand people. So radio frequencies tend to kind of lose their impact there. And I remember giving you the direction because we were going to transition to Vic for the cruiserweight match, and action. What you didn't hear was what I heard in my ear. There was a certain someone watching.
Of course. Because if I could fill in this detail too, also it was the first moment that we were also on the USA Network.
Yes.
That was the first. So we were leading in to the US
simulcasting.
Yeah.
We're simulcasting on there. So you hit that glorious action line with that befuddled look on your face. And I just hear in my ear, God damn, what the fuck was that?
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's awesome. I had never heard that part, by the way. I think Yeah.
I wanted to save it for this moment for you. So hey, look, you got to pop out of Vince for just delivering one of the most awkward lines in the history of sports entertainment television. It was phenomenal. But yeah, right. The dangers of working without a safety net on live TV.
Yeah, and I mean, and to me, it's like it's also one of those good learning moments, and I think it's also the moments that you learn about people. Because I could have been like, oh well, where was Mansury on that? He gave me bad instructions. Or where was this guy? They gave me bad instructions. But the only thing I thought was, they're trusting me.
Yeah.
This media company is trusting me with a live microphone on their television. I need to be able, no matter what gets thrown at me, to form a sentence. That's my part of this, right? So it's like, I can never, and it's never happened again. I can never be in a position where I don't have a sentence, where I can't smoothly transition into something. That's part of the gig. And I remember leaving that going like, I wonder if that was as bad. Like, it was real bad in my head, but I'm also such a self-critic. Maybe it's one of those things that felt real bad, but you didn't even really notice. And I walked back to where the panel was, and it was like raised, and I was on the floor. And the panel like throws to break or whatever, and Renee takes her headset off, and she sees me, and she's like, in like a not mocking way, because Renee's like literally the nicest human being you could ever meet, in a concerned way almost, just leans over and she goes, dude, what happened? And I was like, oh, it was as bad as I thought it was.
You're lucky that at that point Graves had transitioned over the commentary, because if Graves was still doing WrestleMania kickoff shows with us, your ass would have been roasted when you got up there.
Yeah, but it was great. I'm happy to know that I got a pop out of Vince. That really makes me feel good, actually.
I mean, hey, it should make you feel you're still there. You're still working in some capacity with WWE. That actually may have cemented your place forever because of you being able to outlive just that awkward moment.
Yeah, and I love that too, because I'm like, if I was in Vince's position and I had somebody like me that could get awkward in those positions, I swear I would be feeding every producer, just throw lines at him. Just throw lines at. Let's see if we can screw him up again. Like, it's hilarious.
100%. And look, Vince loves a good game, so I'm actually surprised that didn't happen.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it really was. It really was, and it'll be my legacy forever, I feel like.
Oh, I mean, you immortalized it with that T-shirt, which I'm still waiting on, by the way.
You are owed one. You are owed one. So how did the podcast finally come about? How do we decide? You did well. Before we get to the podcast, I guess what kind of led to you deciding to leave? Because I know I can say that, because people are going to think that you're giving like a PC answer, but I can say that I watched the transition out, because I was one of the people begging you not to go, because I told you, you're my security blanket out there. I need you. What am I going to do? I need you. Please don't leave. It's like when you and Renee were both gone, I was like, but you've always been here. I don't exist without you two. Like, don't leave me.
Mom and Dad raised you. Now it's time for you to be a man on your own.
I'm not ready. But like, it was also a very first of all, it was absurdly your choice. Like, it was extremely your choice. It wasn't even one of those things where you say it's your choice, but you're really saving face. Like, it was really your choice, in the sense that I think that I wasn't alone when I say that I didn't want you to go. I think there were a lot of people that didn't want you to go. But it was also an extremely peaceful, to my knowledge, to what I witnessed, and I felt like I got a good grasp of what was going on. It felt like a very peaceful exit. So what led 100%. To that exit?
So, and it's funny, right? Because after I left, you start seeing all these articles that pop up on these wrestling outlets.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks had mentioned that, oh, well, when Kevin Dunn finds somebody that's, eventually gonna, whatever, succeed or whatever the case may be, Vince tends to be pretty critical of that person. That's usually what leads to that person leaving. I had such a great relationship with Vince. I had a phenomenal relationship with the entire McMahon family. Triple H and I were unbelievably close because of all the work that we did together down in NXT. I mean, I was pretty much raised in WWE. I spent a third of my entire life there, right? Just over 11 years. And leaving actually wasn't the easiest choice in the world. I had a couple years prior, I was kind of frustrated with what I, you know, with my course, right? Like where I was going and, the plans for the future, because no one really knew what the plans for the future were. And I, being selfish, if you want to call it that, right? Like I just wanted to work more and I wanted to do so much more and I wanted to contribute a lot more and have an impact on the product and have an impact obviously on my career, but I wanted to do stuff. And those opportunities for whatever reasons weren't readily available to me at that point. And I had expressed that I was looking to leave, had a few meetings with folks at WWE who kind of said like, look, don't make any sort of rash decision just yet. Just kind of sit on it. There is some stuff happening. We promise whatever you're feeling right now, your concerns will, they'll be assuaged and we can move forward, but just don't make any rash decisions just yet. So did that, went along, Fox starts happening, and NXT starts going live. Sky's the limit, right? We're off and running. So even while I was in the middle of it, while I was enjoying what I was doing, I kind of, again, still find myself in a position where I still necessarily wasn't where I wanted to be. I was showing them that I could do the work. They knew that I could do the work. But again, even though I was vice president of global television production, I was still kind of in the executive world. I was still pretty junior. And I wasn't
still, by the way, a wild title for somebody at your age to have. Yeah. That is a wild title to have in a company like that.
Yeah. And truth be told, without, this isn't like a way to bury anybody, right? But, I had asked a couple of times, in reviews or whatever the case may be, what's next? How do I get to that next level? I've shown you that I can execute on TV. I've shown you that I can do X, Y, and Z. What do I need to do? And more often than I was met with the answer of, I don't know. We just kind of need to see what the future, what the next year, what the next 2 years are going to look like. And not necessarily from what I was doing from a work standpoint, but more so the rest of the landscape of the company. Were people going to retire, reduce schedules, whatever the case may be, were new projects going to come up? The answers weren't tangible enough for me to kind of sink a hook into without feeling like a carrot was being dangled in front of my face. So it kind of just got to a point where I realized, I think at this point I've accomplished all that I can accomplish at WWE. And I think if I continue to stay in this capacity, I'm going to wind up becoming bitter. And I don't want that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to come to work and to be resentful of my environment or the people around me, because I'm not in a position where I can do what I want to do and what I've shown you that I can excel at. Mm-hmm. So, maybe the time has come for me to just move on, and who knows what the future may hold. And that's what I did. And so I gave my notice, I think it was the first Monday in March. We were doing Raw in the Barclays Center. It was after we'd gotten back from Saudi Arabia. So kind of just told them then and there, like, hey, I'd like to have a meeting this week and to discuss my exit from the company. And at that time, right, COVID, we didn't really know what it was. It hadn't shut the world down just yet. The XFL was still going on. The WWE world was a busy place. And I asked for the meeting so that we can kind of sit down, just take a look at everything as a whole. WrestleMania was a month out. What do we do and how do I help the transition to get me out of there? So I met with Kevin Dunn. We sat down for an hour. We had a great conversation. I even let Kevin pick my exit date, which was, I think, May 1st, right? So 2 full months pretty much for me to wrap up what we were doing, to transition and head out the door and see what the world had for me.
By the way, on the topic of Kevin Dunn, and I don't want to harp on it because I'm sure he wouldn't want himself to be harped on. Does it, as somebody that I have had conversations with Kevin Dunn, he seems salt of the earth. He seems like a really, not only a good dude, but like somebody so dedicated to his craft and like somebody who's pretty amazing at it too. Does the internet's sort of narrative of Kevin Dunn and kind of blaming him for everything and just, portraying him as this ogre, how far off base is it?
100% off base.
Yeah.
Completely off base.
Yeah.
You said it best. He really is the salt of the earth. From whatever I've read that happened, whatever the narrative is about Kevin for anything that I've ever seen on the internet, it typically comes from people that didn't have good experiences with him.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a good experience with him, I'm sure that's how you're going to classify him. Like, I didn't have good experiences with a lot of WWE people, meaning them having experiences with me. So I'm sure they may have an opinion of me as being, an ogre or an asshole, whatever the case may be. But right, negativity sells. And when you're trying to push shit out there and you're looking for somebody to blame, who better to blame than the guy who's practically Vince's right-hand man?
Mm-hmm.
I always thought he was kind of painted unfairly. But again, people will kind of spin whatever narrative they want to kind of further their point. I never had anything but great experiences with Kevin. He took great care of me from the moment that I got there, and he, very rarely does a PA kind of get the attention of the big folks, but I was fortunate enough pretty much from the onset of my WWE career that I had, Kevin Dunn guiding me, Vince guiding me, because at the time when I started, working on the arena floor, Vince was doing rehearsals. So I am learning from Kevin Dunn, learning from Vince, the two guys with Pat Patterson and Bruce Pritchard, right, that built the WWE.
Wow.
Like, what more of an education can you necessarily want in the business?
Yeah. I mean, I try to stay really aware of people, and who I would want around me in a professional and personal capacity. Like, there's just certain people with certain energy and certain work ethics that you just don't want around you because it's bad. It's negative. It's like, there are people that'll bring you down, and there are people that will make you better and that you'll actually be able to enjoy as a human being. And I mean, Kevin Dunn just strikes me as the type of person that you want around you. Just, you want to be under that learning tree as a human being and as a worker.
Absolutely. I mean, and the funny thing about Kevin, when it came to me, right, because of just, I'm a very just creative focused person.
Yeah.
He always knew how to kind of just poke and prod me to get the best out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes just throwing like a jab of a line at me because he knew it was only going to make me work 20 times harder to show him, like, I got you, dude. Come on.
Yeah.
So it was very much an old lion, young lion relationship. But like, even, outside of work, I had a great relationship with him. I couldn't find any more positive things to say about him. I'm very, very fortunate to have had the opportunity to really learn and expand upon what he built just on the TV side of things.
So you, as a WWE kid, now find yourself as a grown-ass man doing a wrestling podcast where you have a level of expertise that most don't, with the enemy, with the commentator from the other side of the Monday Night War, with Mark Madden, who the internet, I would say, let's be nice, polarizing figure. Mark Madden, right? Which isn't a bad thing in the world of podcasting and broadcasting. Being polarizing, trust me, is never a bad thing. How did this come about? Not just doing the podcast with Pat, because obviously that's a little bit more organic, but Mark Madden being the guy that is going to be your co-host.
So we never, initially when we talked about relaunching Wrestling with Sports Entertainment, we almost just thought about adding me to the original mix of you and Pat.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time, once Pat and I had talked about it, told him I wasn't comfortable just yet. Let's wait down the line. We were in the mix of football season. Football season is just massive time for Pat because that's the meat and potatoes of the product, right? Is the football season and, Pat and the boys and their take on the game. So occasionally Madden would call into the show, and with most of the guys in our office being from Pittsburgh, and one of them even having like a relationship, some sort of relationship with Mark. I think Mark was like a hockey coach of his when he was younger. Mark would appear more and more, and the guys at the office just loved him. And I always found him to be entertaining. I wasn't really too familiar with his WCW work outside of working with Mean Gene Okerlund, my main man. I wasn't too familiar with his work there, but I got to be familiar with Mark from his work on our show. And you could just tell, you use polarizing, right? I think that's the best word to describe him, because he's so unbelievably brilliant and has a way with words. It's just the stuff that he says is usually the stuff that most people don't want to hear and more often than not, it tends to be right.
Mm-hmm.
So it always entertained me. And as we were kind of going along and headed towards the off season, we're like, well, shit, what sort of new content can we sort of dive into that might fill the time until football gets roaring again for us? And we were like, let's get into wrestling. It's natural. I mean, Pat, being such a big wrestling fan himself, brings wrestling to the forefront in his show whenever he can.
And, being the Wrestling Observer's Rookie of the Year.
Hey, Rookie of the Year in 2 matches.
Yeah.
2 matches.
Yeah. Yeah. In a very lopsided Observer Awards, Pat brought one home for the NXT team, didn't he?
Hey, you know what? If someone had to carry the black and gold banner, man, it's cool to have been McAfee. The stuff that he did, I mean, it's hard not to be impressed by the guy. You know what I mean? Because he really just, it's almost like there's we ask him and joke about it, at the office sometimes. Is there anything you can't do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember the kickoff show when they were like, we want you to just run out into the crowd and just hype things up for a minute at the end of the show. And Pat was like, yeah. And they were like, yep, just go run into the crowd in the middle of the audience and be Pat McAfee for a while. And he was like, all right. Boom.
Grabbed the mic, cut a promo.
And it was great. And it was great.
And just like what happened to you, he couldn't hear me. It was just all instincts. And we managed to get off the air while he was in the middle of leading the crowd in an NXT chant.
So when you see Pat, right, and he's on NXT TV, and now you're on the other side, you're actually in the Pat McAfee Mafia instead of the NXT Mafia. Do you, as you're watching those segments with your guy on there, do you find yourself like kind of in your brain going like, oh, I kind of wish I was producing this segment because now I feel close to it. And it wasn't, I mean, you're a couple of months removed from doing the job. It's not like this is 5 years old, right?
Oh my God. So literally, my first day in Indiana, Pat and I have a talk and he goes, hey, so this is interesting, but just so you know, there's a realistic chance that I'm going to be doing something with WWE probably this summer. And it gave me a good kick, but anything, especially involving NXT, because I do hold NXT so close to my heart, for being part of it, pretty much from inception to the day I left. NXT was the last show that I produced before I left WWE. I just sat there just salivating, wishing that I could have been, on headset and calling that show and helping with the creative and laying out what we were going to do with Pat. It's hard not to, you know what I mean? Especially when you love the business as much as I love the business, as much as you love the business. Like it's hard to be there and not want to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that totally. Who do you like right now in NXT? As you watch NXT on a week-to-week basis, who are you like, yeah, that's money?
I mean, you may not be the most popular opinion in the office, but my God, Adam Cole just delivers from every standpoint. To me, he's probably hands down the best in the business right now. Another guy who I've got a close relationship with, that again, I was there with him for his entire ride from the moment he got to NXT through his main roster run and going back, is Finn Balor. I think people right now are seeing the best Finn Balor that they've ever been exposed to. And I still think there's even more that they've yet to see out of Finn, and I'm pumped for him to let that out, but he's just operating on an entirely different level right now. In terms of the new crop, I'm a very, very big fan of her now and her potential of Raquel Gonzalez. I think there's something very, very special about Raquel Gonzalez that she's on the precipice of realizing and really just kind of running forward. Everybody down. I mean, Io Shirai, she's just absolutely phenomenal. There's seemingly nothing that she can't do within the confines of a wrestling ring. It's unbelievable. They really do have just a group of talented men and women down there that just make, watching the shows very, very enjoyable.
Do you think we as fans almost take for granted, just because there's so much wrestling on television now, do you think we take for granted that we're living in an era where you're literally, I mean, Adam Cole versus Finn Balor is maybe the best wrestling match you could possibly have, and it's just on TV on a Wednesday night, and then we move on to the next thing? Like, do you think at this moment we're kind of taking for granted how good we have it?
I think so. I think 100%, right? Like, look, creatively, are any of the shows in an ideal position, in terms of the fans' eyes? And I'm sure maybe even for the folks behind the scenes, no, probably not. There's always room for improvement, but in terms of what we have right now, like look at all 4 shows. Let's treat each show like an individual show. Raw, SmackDown, NXT, AEW. Look at the talent rosters on there, dude. And you just said it best. You got Finn Balor and Adam Cole for free on TV. You didn't have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, we are unbelievably spoiled. We want better, sure, but for what we're getting, you can't beat it right now. I would argue that the depth of these rosters and, you know, just the talent that's available is probably the best that the business has ever seen. And there are guys, even, you know, if you want to talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, you want to talk about Ring of Honor, even Impact, regardless of their relationship with AEW, there are plenty more folks that you've yet to see on a larger scale that can still wow and deliver.
Do you worry that it's only a matter of time before you deliver a hot take on Wrestling with Sports Entertainment, that you get a text from somebody going, "Bro, I thought we were friends. Like, what are you doing, man? What are you what are you doing?"
No, I mean, I think everyone understands, you know, the concept, right? Like, you've got to, without any sort of honesty, there's no point in doing the show.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'd like to think that if folks know that I'm saying something, it's not coming from a mean place. You know what I mean? Especially those that I know that I may have some sort of critical opinion on, or, you know, maybe some sort of change in direction. It's not coming from a place of, I'm going to bash you for the sake of bashing you. It's because that I know that there's better in there and I want to see that better out there. And look, sometimes for reasons beyond that talent's control or the company's control, you know, creative is what it is. But I think we're on the cusp of seeing something great in the business, man. And I'm really excited for it. A man who was a mentor of mine at WWE, this man named Chris Chambers, who
Mm-hmm.
I hope one day his story and all that he's contributed to the business gets out there. We had a talk not too long before I left, and I think I was kind of frustrated creatively with some stuff. And he had mentioned, you know, when I was here in 1996, we had The Rock, we had Triple H, we had Stone Cold Steve Austin, and the business was probably in the poorest shape that I'd seen it in since, you know, I'd been involved in the game. The creative was all wrong. You fast forward a year later, we had, you know, Triple H was, you know, he was Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the blue blood from Connecticut at that time. The Rock was Rocky Maivia, this babyface third generation, you know, character. And Stone Cold Steve Austin was the ringmaster. You fast forward a year later, once the creative changed and that cycle kind of came around again, the business took off and didn't look back. And I think we're on the precipice right now of seeing that next wave. Because like we said before, look at the talent, Sam, across the business. It's unbelievable. The creative's just not right.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I watch, and there's a lot of times where I'm like, we're a spark away. You never know when the spark's going to come. You don't know if you're 5 years removed from the spark or 5 days removed from the spark. But it's got to be a bigger spark than what AEW closed their last pay-per-view with. But we're one spark. But we're one spark away, I think. And you see these little, I mean, you talk about AEW, like you look at that promo that Mox and Kingston cut, and you're like, if this is a glimpse of what they've got, they could go off on a rocket at any moment. You see stuff the stuff that's happening on SmackDown right now with Roman and Bryan and Big E, the stuff that Big E is doing on SmackDown, the stuff that Apollo, I mean, it's amazing, I think, what Apollo's doing on SmackDown right now. And I feel like that's a spot where it's like, you know, okay, it's almost like you're starting to see the flutters of the ringmaster shifting into Stone Cold Steve Austin, but we're not quite at Austin 316 yet. You know what I mean? Like we're figuring it out, but we still have to get hit with that spark.
100%. I mean, you know, I said it on the podcast last week on Wrestling with Sports Entertainment, going back to AEW. The best thing to have happened to AEW in that botched explosive finish or lack thereof was that it happened to Moxley and Kingston, because if there were two performers that were strong enough to dig themselves out of that hole, it was those two guys, and they did just that. They delivered a promo that you almost kind of forgot what happened once they kind of got rolling and going. And I think that's AEW should you know, throw a couple shekels in the hat for those guys, because they really just absolutely delivered.
Yeah.
In terms of SmackDown, I mean, I'm of the opinion that SmackDown is the better show right now. between, Raw and SmackDown, the shows that the folks call the main roster, right? It's the stories are starting to take shape. You're getting these great matchups. And you have characters like Apollo Crews, who such a phenomenal talent in terms of what he can offer physically. I don't know that he ever had a grasp on the personality / character, and he's got something he can sink his teeth into. And I think he's really, really going to excel with this. I tweeted it out last night during SmackDown. Big E's going to main event WrestleMania this year. Next year, excuse me.
Yeah.
There's no way he can't. The star power that radiates off that man is nuclear.
And it's like you've got Apollo, who I feel like in anyone else's hands, his gimmick would be absurd. Like it would be like, this is ridiculous. But because there's an authenticity to it, there's actual familial ties that he's speaking with an authenticity and a realism that you're like, you connect with it. And Big E, I mean, what he's proven in the last few months, what's I think completely changed the course for him, is his ability to snap out of goofy and get into serious, maintaining the same character. Like that character, and I mean, it's like the little things. When he's literally sitting on a couch with his feet in a foot bath, and then he stands up and he starts going like, "Oh, you want to do something? You want to do something?" And you realize like this guy is a problem. Like the guy with his feet in the foot bath, the reason he can be this goofy is because he's a problem if you want him to be a problem. And you're like, there it is. You hit it. You hit it right on the head. Yeah, I mean, I think Big E, but at the same time, right, I think creative's been a bigger problem on Raw than a lot of the other shows for a while. But Bobby Lashley wins the championship. And all of a sudden, you're looking, and you see his entrance, and you watch him win the title, and you're going like, what is this? It's one of those like, I didn't know I was waiting for this, but this is what I was waiting for.
And it's funny, right? Because Bobby, what a prime example. You hear whispers and murmurs a lot of times coming out of WWE that, well, the old man has lost it. He's lost touch.
Right.
He's clearly lost it. He's not in tune with anything. You mean to tell me that Vince didn't have his fingerprints on any of that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the fact you look at what MVP and the Hurt Business have done. Like, it's been perfect. And Bobby Lashley going into WrestleMania in this spot, it's like there's no, I wouldn't have fantasy booked it, and I consider myself a fabulous fantasy booker. But I wouldn't have, I didn't see it. I remember, like, literally the day of Elimination Chamber, one of the podcast listeners was like, well, they should do Bobby Lashley versus Brock. And I was like, I get that everybody's saying that, and I get that on paper it'd be cool to see two big meaty men slapping meat, like it'd be a cool match. But I go right now, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would Brock Lesnar come back? Bobby Lashley's awesome, but it's not like he's a top of the card person that Brock Lesnar would come back. And in 24 hours, I had to come on and be like, no. That's the match I want to see. Like, they've completely, in 24 hours, told a story where you're like, oh no, this could be a bigger match than Roman versus Edge.
Well, it's funny, right? Look at Bobby's overall journey. They talked about Bobby's 16-year journey to get to breaking into the business and becoming world champion. Bobby started in WWE as a total ass kicker. ECW champion, comes over, he does the main event, the Battle of the Billionaires at WrestleMania. Goes to TNA, has great success there, is kicking ass in the MMA world. And to me, I think his journey kind of really took off when he came back to WWE. And it was almost right. Like, you hear about these talent that talk about, like, paying dues and stuff like that. Like, Bobby got stuck with that shitty story about having the three sisters, and one of them chased him with a dirty mop, and whatever the case may have been.
Horrible.
Like, horrible. Right. But there's a part of me as a fan that you don't appreciate the success without knowing the shit that he went through to get to this point. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, he overcame some pretty awful obstacles to kind of get to this point. And now that we have him at this point, I feel like the audience will appreciate him more. I feel like Bobby, his work is probably just going to continue to rise because I think he finally got to experience what it was like being on the bottom side of things. And it may sound like weird and like, oh, was there some sort of manipulation involved? No, I don't think that's the case at all. I legitimately think that when the whole Three Sisters angle was pitched, hey, this will get Bobby to connect with the audience better. I actually think that Bobby going through all that stuff to get to this point is what has made the fans connect to him that much more, because you really can appreciate that struggle and that journey to seeing this physically just, I don't know. I feel like this is what like toy makers envision action figures to look like when they want to, when they want to get ready for the Christmas line. Like Bobby is built like everyone would imagine to want to be. And his skills are unbelievable. His athleticism, unbelievable. And I legitimately feared for the Miz's life, the Raw where Bobby was crowned champion. Like, it took a little kind of long to get there in my eyes in terms of like teasing the 3-hour stuff. But holy shit, you are a believer of Bobby Lashley.
Yeah, and thank God that it paid off. That would have been one of the worst Raws of all time had the Miz won. But when Bobby Lashley won the title, it was almost like everything's okay. Like, all right, okay. Like, you made us wait for it. All right, but he won the title. And then I actually think it was a decent move to then go back the next week. No stomach cramps, straight up Miz versus Bobby Lashley, no lumberjacks, no nothing. And go like, oh, no. Bobby Lashley destroyed the Miz because that's what Bobby Lashley does.
And it's funny, right? Because like in Bobby's been billed as this monster heel, right? This just absolute wrecking ball ass kicker. And the night he won the title, you thought he was the biggest baby face in the company.
Yeah. And that's what's going to make WrestleMania, I think, so interesting, because it's the first time fans are back. And let's say, we're saying, like, I want to see, the match I want is Bobby versus Brock. Who knows, right? Who knows if Brock will be on WrestleMania? Maybe it will be Bobby versus Drew. Maybe it'll be some triple threat. But let's say it's Bobby versus Drew. It's going to be really interesting. And I think Drew McIntyre has done an unbelievable job in the last year, holding that title, being the top guy on Raw, in a position where it's like he's never been the top guy with fans. He had to figure out how to do this with no audience. And I think that, like, I couldn't sing Drew McIntyre's praises enough. But just given the way the story's been told, and who knows the way it'll be told for the next 4 weeks, but we go into, Raymond James Stadium, and if it's Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre, and there are live fans, not a Thunderdome pre-tape, chant going, who are people cheering and who are people booing, and is it going to match the story told? Because
I think, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think Bobby Lashley is the one that's getting cheered if that's the match that happens.
We very well could be walking into Rock Hogan too, right? In terms of the way the crowd will be split. But, to go back to Drew, you're 100% right in terms of what he's done this year. Mm-hmm. And imagine the challenge that you face when, the pop that Drew got when he eliminated Brock from the Royal Rumble was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you're building towards this WrestleMania moment that is now going to happen without fans. I imagine from a performer standpoint, you want to get that feeling back. You know what I mean? And here's your opportunity to get it back. So I think, as much as they could be split, I think overall both guys are going to blow the roof off the roofless stadium. The pirate ships are going to sink.
Yep.
Everything else in between. I think you can very well see Bobby Lashley and Drew McIntyre steal WrestleMania.
I think it's a good call. And those are the type of hot takes that you're going to get on Wrestling with Sports Entertainment. Every week, right? Every
week. Right now, we're looking at every Tuesday. Card subject to change is always in the business. Sure. But yeah, every Tuesday, I think around like 8 p.m. new episodes drop.
Best thing you can do is get on the intranet and subscribe. Just look up Wrestling. And by the way, it's spelled WRASSLIN. Controversial, but still acceptable. Wrestling with Sports Entertainment. Just look it up wherever you get podcasts. Hit the subscribe button, which I'm hoping you're doing with this podcast anyway. Hit the subscribe button. That way, if the date changes, if whatever changes, you'll be all subbed up and it'll get delivered to your phone every week.
Absolutely. Check us out on YouTube if you're into videos. Also, just search Wrestling with Sports Entertainment. It's a good time. You get to see Mark and I just kind of chop it up and have a good time talking about the business that we both love, that you love. It's pretty wild to be in this position, but I'm enjoying it, man.
It's awesome, man. I'm glad that you are. I'm glad that you're doing this. And we'll definitely have to do this again, not only because just we could talk about the current product all day and have a fine time of it, but I mean, we've literally not scratched the surface on the actual stories that we have doing kickoff shows. I mean, literally the best ones haven't even been mentioned, like not even close. There's still, we could do I think we could do a whole podcast, a series of podcasts on stories from kickoff shows.
Is this your pitch right now?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, let PMI know. I gotta
pre-showing with Mike and Sam.
Yeah.
You get top billing. You're the star.
Yeah, but you know what? Technically, they're your stories, right? The pre-show is yours. You're the producer, all right? You're the great and powerful Oz behind all these kickoff shows.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's always the guy in front of the camera. That was you, man.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. All my stuff from my old WWE office is still boxed up in the New York offices, and I kept what a sweet little memento. I think it may have been after your first WWE pay-per-view kickoff show. This lovely handwritten note on Notsam stationery from just a grateful, polite young man who just wanted to express his gratitude for the working relationship and the opportunity.
If I could guess, I bet the letter, the one I sent to you, you were probably like, "Oh, that was so nice," and the one I sent to Michael Cole, he was probably like, "What a fucking mark."
100%. I actually think we had that conversation.
I love it.
Hey, dude, I got a great card from Sam Roberts. Yeah, I did too. Fucking Mark.
Michael Cole, by the way, one of the greatest human beings you could ever possibly. I love that man, and it will never change.
Phenomenal. We still talk, maybe once, twice a week, and my God, he's just a great dude. But yeah, like you said, we've got a lot. You and I have a lot more stories that we can divulge, and I've got a lot of stories that I'll talk about on the podcast and stuff that happened behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Helping to save Jerry Lawler's life one lovely evening in Montreal.
That would be a good. Yeah, I mean, look. I mean, now you can see Mike Mansury's face. I was about to call you Mark Mansury because but if you want to see now that you've seen his face, go back. That's one of my favorite things to do. Go back to go back to some of the 10 years ago episodes of like NXT on Sci-Fi and Raw and stuff like that, and you'll see babyface young, wet behind the ears Mike Mansury at ringside for
a young cherub-like figure.
That's right, for so many shows. Well, I appreciate it, man. We'll do it again. Thank you, dude.
Hey, I can't thank you enough, Sammy. I'll talk to you soon, babe.